This is Earthfiles, the award-winning news site with the latest updates in science, environment, and real X-Files. Podcasting in-depth reports beyond the 6 o'clock news by Emmy Award-winning journalist Linda Moulton Howe.
A press release dated June 25, 2009, was released on the internet and contained this startling quote by retired United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. Quote, "I wish to make it perfectly clear that the UFOs that I saw were structured machines, moving under intelligent control and operating beyond the realm of anything I have ever seen before or since. I believe the objects that I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and England were and have been complicit in trying to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham by use of well-practiced methods of disinformation." Close quote. That press release came from Gary Haseltine, a British police officer and longtime UFO researcher. Colonel Halt's unexpected assertion is about the extraterrestrial origin of what he and his military team encountered in the British Rendlesham Forest near RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge Air Bases in the early morning of December 28, 1980. Gary Haseltine, 49 years old, was born and raised in Scunthorpe, Lincolnshire, England, until age 23, when he joined the Royal Air Force in police security. He served for 6 years until 1989, and then left to work for the British Transport Police. There are 43 county police forces in England, Scotland, and Wales, and there is one national police force that polices the railway network in the United Kingdom. For the past 15 years, Gary has served as a plainclothes detective constable in the Criminal Investigation Department. Gary sought out police work because of an experience he had when he was 15 years old, living in his hometown of Scunthorpe, England.
My interest began when I was 15. I saw a UFO, for want of a better word, a light in the sky that seemed to trigger a number of power grid failures. All the lights went out, which are often attributed to UFOs. And that incident created the interest in the subject for me, which has stayed with me. So for the last 34 years, I've been very interested in the subject of UFOs, and so much so that by the time 2001 came around, I wanted to become an active researcher. The problem was that as a police detective, if a rape occurs, your time is never much of your own. You can work for hours and hours and hardly be at home. And basically, I had to come up with something that I could research, but it would have to be on my own because of the hours and the nature of the job that I worked. And one day I came up with the idea of police officers. I'd read about one or two police officers in several books, and I began to speculate that police officers have probably seen many, many strange things, but they've never had an outlet or a mechanism to allow them to come forward. And so I created what is called the PRUFOS Police Database, which stands for Police Reporting UFO Sightings. I started off with half a dozen sightings involving a dozen officers, and after 7 years of research, I've now got 300 reports dating back to 1901, involving over 700 British UK police officers. So it's grown a hell of a lot.
Gary Haseltine says that one of the most startling reports came from Police Constable Alan Godfrey in 1980, who watched a diamond-shaped aerial object suspended in the air above a road in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. Policeman Godfrey tried to turn on his police radio to call for help, but the radio was strangely dead. Then he got out of his police car, but was blinded by a bright white light. Policeman Godfrey's next conscious memory was finding himself back in his car, mysteriously moved to a different location down the road, and the white light was gone. Haunted by the encounter, policeman Godfrey sought hypnosis. What emerged was his description of being on a spacecraft with small, non-human entities examining his body.
As a result of that, I've become known within the UFO community, and from time to time I'll be asked to take part in various television documentaries. And on one occasion in December 2007, the American History Channel were making a couple of documentaries in the UK, one about police officer sightings, so that's why I was involved. And in the process of talking to their producer, I said, what else are you coming over for? And they said, oh, we're going to make a documentary about Rendlesham Forest. And I said, well, who else is getting involved? And they said, oh, we're flying Colonel Halt across. My interest stems from the fact that during my 6 years in the Royal Air Force, I served on 2 nuclear bases, one in the UK and one in what was then West Germany, protecting nuclear weapons. And the layout of the bases, of which Bentwaters and Woodbridge was leased from the RAF, was a very similar design to the ones that I'd worked on. And I personally had always suspected that there must have been many more witnesses involved who have yet to be traced. And so I said, well, I have this theory because I worked on these kind of bases. You know, is there any way I could come down? And they said, oh, that sounds interesting. And I spent 3 days on the documentary down at Rendlesham, and during that process spent a lot of time with Colonel Halt, who I'd never met before.
What year and month?
That was December 2007.
So you were there at the same light and time, basically, as the original event of December 26th to 28th?
Well, I think that was the idea of the History Channel.
Could you jump to the most recent 2009 release from you concerning a film that you are now working on and that you could read for me now, the statement from Colonel Halt?
Yes. Just before I do that, I want to make this perfectly clear that at this moment in time, a film is not being made. What I have done, having met Halt some 19 months ago, is I asked him during that 3-day visit, had anybody ever tried to write a film script about Rendlesham Forest? And he said no. And I said, well, I sort of do like to write. Would you allow me to write it, research it, and collaborate with you on it? And he said there and then, yes, I'll help you in any way I can. So basically what happened is I then went away for about 4 months and researched all the known documentaries, books, articles that had been put out about the events at Rendlesham, and created, again using some of my detective acumen, a very detailed timeline of the events from literally the first night through to the point at which he sends off the Halt memorandum to the MOD. And then I went back to Halt and began asking him question after question after question, and that's what happened perhaps for the next 15 months until we got to a stage where the first draft was complete, and then I put it to him and said, look, you know, what do you think? He didn't get it till December of 2008 when he got the first version, the first draft, and he read it, and he said that was great, and he loved it, and that he would fully endorse what was written. And since Christmas, we've been adapting it and tweaking things as you would do with any film script. So what we have is a film script which is available to meet with film producers, etc. And that was the idea of putting out the press release to announce that there's been a collaboration between Colonel Halt and myself, and that we now have a workable film script that I believe is crying out to be made into a feature film. You asked me to read the quote?
Yes.
Right. The press release that was put out the 25th of June, which was agreed and which Colonel Halt is very happy to go out with, he said, quote, I wish to make it perfectly clear that the UFOs I saw were structured machines moving under intelligent control and operating beyond the realm of anything I have ever seen before or since. I believe the objects that I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and England were and have been complicit in trying to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham by use of well-practiced methods of disinformation. I believe Gary's script will lift a veil of secrecy about what really happened at Rendlesham, events that were and still are of tremendous defence significance to the United Kingdom and indeed the rest of the world.
In 1942, the British Royal Air Force constructed an airbase between Butley and Tunstall in Suffolk County, England, on the northeastern edge of Rendlesham Forest. It was called RAF Butley, about 4 miles northeast of RAF Woodbridge. The Rendlesham Forest was enlarged in the 1940s to help shield military activities. To the south was the RAF Bodsey Chain Home Radar Station that during World War II monitored the launch of V-2 rockets from Germany. Although there was no defense against the V-2 rocket, RAF Bodsey was able to provide the British Bomber Command with the location of the V-2 launch sites, which could then be attacked. East of Butley at Orford Ness, an experimental Madre over-the-horizon radar station was constructed in 1961 to monitor Soviet launches. After the end of World War II, RAF Butley was renamed RAF Bentwaters by Britain's Ministry of Defense and leased to the United States Air Force for its 81st Fighter Interceptor Wing and the 67th Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Squadron. By 1958, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge became a joint U.S. Air Force and Royal Air Force complex with the big, thick Rendlesham Forest in between. In 1992, after the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Cold War thawed, the United States canceled its involvement with RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters. The historic RAF Bentwaters is now a privately owned business park, while RAF Woodbridge is used by the UK Ministry of Defence for Army training exercises. What exactly did happen between midnight on December 26, 1980, to 5 a.m. on December 28, 1980, in Rendlesham Forest that provoked U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and Airman First Class John Burroughs to describe lights in the Rendlesham Forest as alive and speaking to them telepathically on December 28, 1980. Those words were used by John Burroughs in a 1988 hypnosis session to describe his and Colonel Charles Halt's impressions of the lights. There were even rumors that Burroughs jumped on a craft or was taken up in a beam of light. As the clock was about to change from Christmas Day 1980 to midnight December 26, 1980, 20-year-old Airman First Class John Burroughs was on security police duty at RAF Woodbridge's back gate, commonly known as the East Gate. With Airman Burroughs was Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens. RAF Woodbridge was 4 miles west of RAF Bentwaters. Sometime after midnight, Sergeant Steffens and Airman John Burroughs saw strange, colorful lights hovering at treetop level in the Rendlesham Forest east of the gate. So Burroughs and Steffens drove their patrol car out the East Gate on a road along Rendlesham Forest. The colorful red, orange, and blue lights in the clear night sky seemed closer than before. Suddenly, a large white light appeared moving along the edge of the forest, as if pacing their car, and it seemed to move even closer to them. Later on, Airman Burroughs submitted a handwritten statement about what he saw to the RAF Bentwaters Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. You can see the statement written by John Burroughs and his sketch of the mysterious Rendlesham aerial lights at Earthfiles.com. Go to www.earthfiles.com and click on the hot link to 1980 RAF Bentwaters Lights and Craft were extraterrestrial in origin. With John Burroughs was Staff Sergeant James W. Peniston, the duty supervisor at RAF Woodbridge on that night of December 26, 1980. According to notes in Sergeant Peniston's notebook and his official written report, he and Airman Burroughs got to the center of Rendlesham Forest, and then Peniston wrote in his statement, quote, When we got within a 50-meter distance, which is about 150 feet, the object was producing red and blue light. The blue light was steady and projecting under the object. It was lighting up the area directly under, extending a meter or two out. At this point of positive identification, I relayed to Sergeant Coffey positive sighting of object, color of lights, and that it was definitely mechanical in nature, close quote. Peniston also said that the air was filled with electricity, like static. Quote, you could feel it on your skin as you approached the object. There was also a sense of slowness, like time itself was an effort. I got to within 10 feet of the craft in the clearing where it sat, close quote. Sergeant Peniston estimated the craft to be 3 meters long at the base and 2 meters high, or about 10 feet long by 7 feet high. No landing gear was apparent, but the object seemed raised up, as if it were on fixed legs. Peniston said he walked right up to the craft and noticed the fabric of the shell was like a smooth, opaque black glass. He said, quote, no animals were even making noise anymore. The nearer we got to that thing, the more uneasy I felt. It was as if I were moving in slow motion, close quote. You can see Sergeant Jim Peniston's statement and his drawings of the triangle-shaped, dark, glassy surface craft at www.earthfiles.com. 2 nights later, on December 28, 1980, after midnight, John Burroughs felt drawn back to the Rendlesham Forest and encountered lights again. This time, RAF Bentwaters Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, was in the forest with a tape recorder, light-alls, and other equipment to document the persistent and unusual light phenomena. Colonel Halt said on the tape recording of December 28, 1980, quote, now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal, close quote. British transport policeman Gary Haseltine confirms that in the early morning hours of December 28, 1980, Colonel Halt did see a white beam of light come from a bright, unidentified aerial object and aim downward to the RAF Bentwaters weapons storage area.
Halt corroborates this. He said that over 3 radio channels that he was monitoring whilst he was out with his troops, and as they were en route back, he could see that a UFO was shining a beam down into the weapons storage area. And the script will deal with that aspect as well.
Is that confirmed by the radar tower watcher?
Well, I don't have his details, so I can communicate with him. This is on the basis of what Halt is telling me, the communications that that person has had with Halt. But what Halt is significantly saying once and for all is that he was monitoring 3 radio channels and heard the person in the tower confirming over the radio that beams were being shone down as he watched into the weapons storage area. And that's a very significant thing for him to say. We had a situation where we had a strategic base where many numbers of US Air Force policemen were involved in guarding a weapons storage area.
That was nuclear.
Which I believe was nuclear. And the reason why I believe it was nuclear, Halt will never give you that definitive answer on that, purely because of his Air Force allegiances. But having worked on 2 UK bases, if it was conventional weapons, non-nuclear, on an Air Force base, there would be very few, if any, Air Force policemen guarding that facility. On the weapons storage area at Bentwaters and Woodbridge, there were 14 US Air Force policemen guarding that facility, and there was a whole host of mobile patrols ready to respond to any kind of threat. In total, there were 38 officers and airmen involved at the Bentwaters site. I leave it for you to draw your own judgments.
Right, and it means it needed high security, and that's what always has gone with nuclear weapons storage.
Correct. And that's where where my interest initially came from, because I'd been involved. They did, at Bentwaters and Woodbridge, exactly what I did in the Air Force. And one of the key people is this person in the tower on the weapons storage area at Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Yeah? The simple reason is, in 1980, that high tower would have been way above all of the surrounding trees. It would have had a total 360-degree view unobstructed. The trees would not be allowed to be at the level of anywhere near that tower. And I've been up in those towers. And in fact, when we made the History Channel programme, one of the things that I said was, I want to go with Halt up to that tower and see if he will talk about other witnesses. And when we did go up there, he did talk about another witness that had been in contact with him, but he wanted to remain anonymous because he had seen how much interest there had been from any of the witnesses, the Penistons, the Burrows, the Comanzas, etc.
And Gary, assuming that that tall tower was there because there were nuclear weapons stored underground and they had 360 degrees clear vision of everything that was happening in Rendlesham Forest, what do you have on the record of what was said from that tower operator during those 3 nights?
There are scenes within the script that show that the person in the tower would have seen anything that was going on in the distance, would have been consulted with by senior officers who would have said, take a look outside, because he was in a high vantage point.
Why do you think that it took nearly 30 years for Colonel Halt to say to you, quote, I believe the objects that I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin?
In a sense, that's down to me, because I've said to Halt, if we're going to do this, there's no point in you telling me things if we are not going to have, ultimately, a definitive statement from you. After 29 years, I would like a definitive statement from you about your recollections on what you saw, and I think we needed to announce this to the press and obviously to create a stir, which hopefully it is doing. And he has reflected upon that, and he has come out with those words. He is fully supportive of everything that I've done at every stage of the collaboration process. I have asked him questions, he has come back. I have asked him further questions, he has come back. And then when it got to the stage of nearing completion at Christmas, I said, look, it's took a lot longer than I thought, but here is the first draft. I want you to change anything that you're not happy with. Let me know what you think. And after Christmas, he came back and said, excellent, 1 or 2 little things here and there, minor little tweaks, and then we've gone from there. And he is aware that people will say, why now do you make this kind of definitive statement? And the answer is because I've pushed him into saying, well, if that's what you really believe, then that's what you have to put out. Because I don't think you can be wishy-washy on this. You have to go with your genuine beliefs and pin them out there. And he has come back and he's happy to do so. And we have the quote.
Gary, where is Colonel Halt now and what does he do?
He's now retired somewhere in, I believe, in Washington State.
If there are many eyewitnesses to events in the Rendlesham Forest near Bentwaters, December 26th to 28th, 1980, and if some of those eyewitnesses who were working in the military feel that Colonel Halt's particular timeline may not be absolutely correct, would you consider the possibility of talking with these other people to include perhaps some of their perceptions in this film?
Well, as a police officer and researcher, I want this to be as accurate as possible. Now, there are some inconsistencies from numerous people. However, the consensus of events are that in the Halt memorandum that Halt wrote to the MOD, he got the date wrong. No two ways about it, he got the date wrong of the first night. So he has clarified within the script, and it's now a general consensus, that the first night's events were the early hours of Christmas night into Boxing Day. The Peniston and Burrows, Cabanza going out into the woods.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear this, that he has now conceded that was an error and now puts him on the same page with the others.
I would not be doing my job if if I didn't say, well, hang on a minute, this doesn't seem to ring right when I'm doing my research? Is there any way you could have made a mistake? Especially when you tied it in with the police messages, when the UK police turned up and things like that. It was clear that there was a mistake and that the first night was Christmas night into the early hours of Boxing Day. He now accepts that. So that is the first night. Some people, and I know Burroughs will go with this, that he believes there was something that happened 26th in the 27th.
Right.
But not many people say that, as far as I can see. So the next main night is 27th into the 28th. And this is when, on the 27th, Halt is at Woody's Bar, social function, when he is informed the lights are back. And he then puts together a small team to go out into the forest, to go to the landing site to do measurements. They're trying to get light poles out there, and they do the measurements. They've got the star scope, image intensifier. They find the broken branches. They find the small blast area. They find the triangular markings, the depressions in the hard ground. And then the red winking light that's now become linked with Halt is seen, and then begins this move away from the landing area and a chase or a walk through the woods following this winking object, winking like an eye that appears to be dripping molten metal, but no molten metal can be found. They go off to the farmer's field. Now, this is an interesting thing, and this is something that is never really dealt with once and for all. As a police officer who have worked on many incident rooms, if we were to analyse and rerun Rendlesham, if it had been run as a police incident, somebody would have come up and said, well, they just saw a lighthouse, okay, which is one of the classic sceptical arguments put forward. Well, here's my counter to that. I stood at the edge of the farmer's field with Halt and members of the US History Channel programme. And as we looked out at the farmer's field, there was the farmer's house that is referred to by Halt with the object casting a glow into the window because it was so close to the farm. Now, he described the object as being a couple hundred metres away to the left of the farmhouse from where we were stood in broad daylight. He pointed out across, there's the farmhouse, pretty much directly ahead. And then to the left of it, he said, was this object low in the farmer's field, glowing, shining, a reflection into the windows of the farmhouse. It almost looked like it was on fire. So there we have Halt stood next to me and the US History Channel crew saying to the left of the farmhouse was this glowing object, literally 15 feet above the farmer's field. A clear, unobstructed view. And then he said, oh, now look to the right, way on the horizon. That is where the Orford Nest Lighthouse is. To the right of the farmhouse, way off in the distance, and in broad daylight you couldn't see it. But on a night you would have seen it. But the point is, the object he saw, 200 metres in darkness, strange objects, clear, unobstructed view across the farmer's field. The object is low to the ground, left of the farmhouse. He can see beacon light of the Orford Nest Lighthouse way on the horizon to the right of the farmhouse. So let's get this one thing clear. Once and for all, it was not the lighthouse that Halt saw.
Right, and he is a colonel who was in charge of a lot of men in Bentwaters Woodbridge.
He was the deputy base commander.
Yes, as deputy base commander, to even hypothesize that he would have confused a lighthouse in an area where he had been working for a long time with something that he and other men were chasing through a forest, I've always thought was ridiculous.
Well, it has always been ridiculous, but I do believe this is where the media as a whole have played a very important part in downplaying this entire subject, including the Rendlesham saga. For the simple reason is that literally every documentary I've ever seen being made, whether it be US, Japanese, German, or the UK, everyone has played a lot of airtime to the lighthouse theory. And it contradicts what the men who were involved said. And that is ignoring the evidence, the testimony of multiple witnesses. Look at the first night, Penistone and Burroughs, Cabanzac. Cabanzac gets put out as a relay. When the radio starts to fade, he is left behind to act as a relay. And it's Penistone and Burroughs that go forward. They see a landed object. Penistone goes around it. Is that the lighthouse? It's ludicrous. But all the media, whether it be newspapers, TV, documentaries, have always given this lighthouse theory a lot of airtime. And I believe that is a deliberate ploy by some aspects of the media to downplay the significance of this sighting and many others.
Gary, isn't it possible that the lighthouse was actually planted and promoted by people at Bentwaters, both American and British, who wanted to deflect media attention on what they knew was a highly important series of events over at least 3 nights that, quote-unquote, affected national security?
That is the whole point, and this is what Halt is saying. Now, Halt is saying, why has nobody ever interrogated me? Why did I feel as if I'd been kept out of the loop? And it's his belief, rightly or wrongly, but it's his belief that because of his seniority in rank, that there was a deliberate decision made by the security services to exclude him from that process because of his high rank. And therefore, he has remained pretty much left alone.
What is your own perception now on what came up in the Jim Penistone hypnosis in his own effort to recover what had happened to him under sodium pentothal in his early 1990s hypnosis session, trying to recover what the military hypnosis had been in 1980? In that transcript that I deal with in Glimpses Volume 2, High Strangeness, he refers to the beings in the craft, the intelligence having to do with the lights in the craft in the Rendlesham Forest, as being time travelers coming far back in time, perhaps as far back as 40 to 50,000 years, in an effort to use genetic material from the Earth for, quote, Band-Aids, close quote, in a huge problem that the future time travelers are trying to solve.
When you say it to the general public and talk about time travel, that's probably on a par with talking about abductions for most people who are not following the subject. Obviously, he was regressed. These memories have come out. But in the end, we will never know how accurate those are. I think from my point of view, as a police detective trying to delve into this subject, I have tried to stay away from those kind of aspects where we'll simply never know. And what occurs is that Jim Penistone was given sodium pentothal and was interrogated. He saw an object, he recorded it in his pocketbook, he walked around it, he touched it, he submitted the photographs. They came out, some people would say, mysteriously fogged. One of the things that's very interesting about that first night with Penistone and Burroughs is that once they go off and they leave Cabanzac behind to act as a radio relay, that when they eventually come back, having seen the object on the ground, it rises, it disappears. They then go try to search for it, and eventually they see a beacon light in the distance, what turns out to be Orford Ness Lighthouse. They had walked towards it after the object had gone. They tried to find the object again. They think they see the same light again. They walk towards it, perhaps a couple of miles. They then determine, no, we've got close enough, we know what that is. That's a beacon light from the lighthouse. And they then turn around and go back towards the base. Now, significantly, when they get back in, and it is covered in the script, some people said, you've been gone for 3 hours.
That's right. Missing time.
The timeline allows for the possibility that to them it was an hour or 2 hours, but maybe it was 3 hours. They could not explain it. And this is maybe where the aspect of regression and missing time and the abduction element may well be true. What I tried to do is stick to the factual elements of the story. Obviously, Hulk is a major player to evolve in a very close encounter with UFOs. And whether he likes it or not, one of the first things I said to him, I said, you may have had a very distinguished career in the US Air Force. I says, but unfortunately, whether you like it or not, you are going to be remembered as the man who wrote the Halt memorandum. And the reality is that it was a major event, and there are clear admissions by many of the players involved that they were interrogated. And the reason why they were interrogated seems to me obvious from somebody who has been in the Air Force. The many, many occasions when politics and the military get involved in downplaying anything, whether it be 9/11 or anything like that. If people want to put out a false version, it can be done. These methods have been used widely by the security services. So to me, it would seem logical that somebody in the security services made a decision. How can we downplay the significance of these first two events, Penniston and Burroughs' first night and the Halt team going out on 2 nights later? Literally, this could be the case that is a house of cards and everything falls down, and we've got to admit, hey, we've been lying to you for many, many years.
About extraterrestrial interaction.
About extraterrestrial visitation.
We're talking about a phenomenon that our government and the British government have a policy of denial in the interest of national security and have had since World War II.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And that means that when an event like Bentwaters occurs, there are procedures in play to misinform the public and the media to keep them at bay and to reinforce the ridiculous explanations, because our government has learned for a long time that if you use even the word hoax or you come up with any stupid explanation, the public and the media in the vast majority will accept it without any investigation, including the New York Times. Now, this leads me to, if you were John Burroughs, and you had the kind of repeating dreams that he has, if you were haunted by what he is convinced is suppressed information inside of his very mind, and he wants it out, and in the hypnosis that we have done so far, he is talking about he and Penniston are dealing with blue lights that they refer to as talking to them telepathic lights. And at one point, Colonel Halt himself talks with Burroughs about the lights that communicated with them. That means that those possible 3 hours of missing time, the hypnosis sessions that have said that people in the tower looked at John Burroughs and said, we got a report that you either jumped up on this craft or you rose up in a beam of light. Is it possible that John Burroughs was taken and that today, finally in 2009, we might be close to a breakthrough in hypnosis in his mind, and that he may or may not hold the key to what exactly was the source and the agenda of these interactors in the Rendlesham Forest in December 1980 that Colonel Halt now, 30 years later, says were, quote, extraterrestrial in origin, close quote.
Who knows? The reality is that there appears to be a genuine question that they could have been gone for 3 hours, which does not sit with either of them very well because they did not feel they'd been away for that length of time. Both gone under hypnosis and both have come out with accounts of interactions with beings or whatever. If it can be corroborated, great. But whoever gets hypnotized, whoever comes out with an account, in the end, it's an account. Yes, they may corroborate each other under hypnosis, but in the end, it is a strange account, which I'm not saying is not true, but what I'm saying is that what I'm trying to do with this story is tell it from the most factual consensus point of view, so that if and when this film is ever made, it will reach a much wider audience than just the people who are interested in the subject.
Do you speculate in your film script about why there would have been such an enormous cover-up for the last 30 years by both British and the American governments?
There was a cover-up of some kind. Now, I thought that before I met Halt, and obviously having collaborated with him for 19 months, he has given me much deeper insight into his beliefs. And he has said many times that he believed that the security services were involved in trying to put out disinformation. And I think what he's saying is that by the disinformation, there are many aspects of Rendlesham that a lot of people can't agree on. And his take on that is that certain airmen, not just one, several airmen, were interrogated and fed false information to say things that might not necessarily have happened, but they believed that they had happened. And it was done to downplay the significance of the first night, which was principally Penistone and Burrows, and then 2 nights later, when Halt and 4 others led a forward party following an object through the forest, having been examining the landing site from 2 days earlier. Yes, I personally do believe that it's something that the British and Americans are capable of, because history tells us that in literally every other sphere of politics, that if something needs to be hidden, then it can be hidden. If something needs to have disinformation, then disinformation can be put out there. They are well-worn techniques, not just necessarily that apply to the UFO community. So I genuinely believe that there was a conspiracy. There are many wild aspects to the case, and I don't think we're probably, even with the script that we have now, I still don't think we really know any more than 75% of what's occurred. But what is clear is from many of the people, they were interrogated. So that is a fact. That seems to be a consensus fact, that there was some kind of interrogation process by the U.S. security services.
At my news website, www.earthfiles.com, you can see a copy of the January 13th U.S. Air Force Colonel Charles Halt memorandum about the extraterrestrial phenomenon in the Rendlesham Forest. In addition, at earthfiles.com, there is also a copy of an alleged UK Ministry of Defense memorandum that includes these sentences, quote, "Interestingly, OSI reports that the entities were approximately 1.5 meters tall, wore what appeared to be nylon-coated pressure suits, but no helmets. Tape recordings were made on which the entities are heard to speak in an electronically synthesized version of English with a strong American accent. Similar transmissions intercepted irregularly by NSA since 1975. According to OSI, entities had claw-like hands with 3 digits and an opposable thumb."
Thanks for listening to this Earthfiles podcast from the edges of science, environment, and real X-Files. Go to www.earthfiles.com to see more than 1,000 Earthfiles reports with photographs, drawings, and documents. And visit Earthfiles every day, every week for new reports and new podcasts. That's www.earthfiles.com.